And I just wanted to address, there was a comment on my last live where a person asked where my inspirational talks and content come from, because in the last video I talked about how I spend usually the first 5 minutes of class talking about something kind of inspirational and all of that, and so where does all that come from? So there's a lot of different places. It can come from conversations that I have with people. I try to surround myself with people who are uplifting and motivating and encouraging and very positive, and so I learn a lot from those individuals, and oftentimes will share some bits and pieces of the content of those conversations with my students. So first, it can come from a conversation that I have with someone. That's one of the first places that I look to share things, because it's real and it's something that the students can really relate to. So that's that. Then the second place where my inspiration for Gen Z comes from are obviously books. I'm always reading. One of the pieces that I talked to about with my students the other day came from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and another piece of inspiration came from this book, Relentless. And I try to post these books on my social media page, so any book that I'm reading, usually be recommended there. And then there's this one book I read a little while ago called Rare Leadership, which is great. And then there's this one book, this one I didn't talk to my students about. This book is pretty good. It's called Motivational Teaching or Motivated Teaching. And it's very direct. It just tells you this is what it is. And I kind of appreciated that. So I would definitely recommend that book as well. And then also, if you guys hadn't seen it, my book actually just came in, so I'm really excited about it. There's that. So books, so conversations with people is where I get my inspiration from, and then books that I read, things like that. I actually just read an excerpt from a book that I'm reading right now, and I'll tell you what that is once I finish it, to my students today. And we were talking about human nature and social media and all that kind of stuff in Spanish, and it was really cool. And then the other places where I get a lot of my motivational content is, aside from conversations and books, is I will listen to a lot of motivational speakers like Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn, I think is his name. And then what is that guy's name? I can't even remember his name, but he was a Navy SEAL. He was a Navy David Goggins. That's what his name. David Goggins. I listened to him. He's a little bit raw, so I kind of have to censor it a little bit if I talk about David Goggins. I'll listen to lots of just different inspirational people who I really look up to, role models in society, best-selling authors, things like that. And that's typically where I get my inspirational stuff for Gen Z. And then in a couple minutes, I'm going to post a picture of my board, if that would be something that would interest you, of where I write down these secrets to building an amazing life, as I call them. I'll post the ones that I had last year, and then I'll post the ones that I had this year, or I have so far this year, and I'll post it on my social media so that you can see that as well. And as the days go on, I will try to post more content about what I actually say to Gen Zers, and I'm actually going to make a post about this very soon. But this is not necessarily about motivation, but about clarity and defining expectations for Gen Z. So this year I've seen a lot of teachers talking about how their students are really chatty this year. They're talking over the teachers and talking during the activities and the quizzes and things like that. So I've seen a lot of that, and I actually experienced that myself in my own classroom with pretty much all of my classes. They're very chatty this year for sure, and I understand that it's just comes from isolation and seeing their friends and all that, and I totally get it. But the thing is that today I told my students, and this is actually going on the board under the Secrets to Building an Amazing Life, is the idea that you teach people every day. You teach people how to treat you. That's a lesson I'm still always learning, actually, in my own life. But so in the class, I told that to my students. I said, hey guys, we're going to talk about this idea of how we teach people how to treat us and how that applies in the classroom. So I'll give you an example. I told my students, I said, hey, and they were being super chatty, and so I said, okay, if student X has their cell phone out in class and they're not doing any work, for example, and they're not paying attention, they're just totally disconnected to what we're doing in class, then I said, if you take that quote, every day you teach people how to treat you, then how do you think that student, that X student, is teaching me how to treat them, right? How do you think that they're teaching me how to treat them? And so they were like, I'm not really sure. And I said, well, if they're on their phone in class, okay, which wasn't the problem. The problem was the chattiness, and I brought that up later. But I said, if that person's on their phone in class, then if the world were perfectly fair, then the way that I would be treating that person is with lower standards. I would have lower standards for that individual because they're teaching me how to treat them based on their behavior, right? And so I put it back on them. And so they were like, oh, okay. And I said, so the exact same thing goes for all of you guys collectively, right? Is that, you guys are being chatty in class, you're talking over me, things like that. And I said, so how do you think that's teaching me that I need to treat you? And they were like, And I said, so same exact thing. Collectively, you guys are telling me that I should treat you with lower expectations than I do my other classes. Is that what you want? And they were like, nope. And so they straightened up after that because you do with Gen Z, you really do have to point things out to them because they're not necessarily going to see it. So I'll give you another example. Another student was talking about how there was a younger person that was like 7 years old who was back talking one of his relatives. And so that student high school student got really upset that the 7-year-old was back talking the relatives. But then that same student, the high school student who got upset at the little kid, was back talking his own mother. And so the kid didn't even make the connection. So he was upset that the little kid was doing it, but didn't realize that he was doing it himself. So when you make that clear and you broaden their horizons and you sort of open their eyes to that kind of thing, like, wait a second, you're actually teaching me to have lower expectations for you based on what you're doing. And if the world were perfectly fair, that's exactly what I would do. Then that's kind of how I sort of reasoned with them, and they kind of got the point on that. So anyway, so that's where my inspiration typically comes from, is books, conversations, listening to motivational speakers and stuff like that every day. And the key point that I want you to walk away with is this. The key point is that if we want to fill them up, think of it like an empty glass, right? So Gen Zers are coming to your class, and I talk about this more in the book as well. So Gen Zers are coming into your class like an empty glass, like totally empty. And so as teachers, we got to fill them up with knowledge, motivation, inspiration, all that. And the only way that we can fill them up is if we take the time to fill up our glass. So we've got to be fulfilled, and then we can then pour into them. And then, as the Bible says, the cup runneth over. So that's kind of how I look at it, is every day I'm refilling up this glass with knowledge, hope, inspiration, and motivation. And I find my sources pretty much anywhere. So Maricel says, do you, yes, motivational speakers online. Yep, absolutely. You can just literally Google it or YouTube it. I subscribe to a ton of motivational YouTube channels and things like that. And the thing is that you don't have to do exactly what I do. You can, it's really just about becoming the best version of yourself. So you can go to YouTube, subscribe to all these motivational channels and things like that. Some people like spiritual channels. Some people like more meditation-based content, things like that. So whatever is really in harmony with you, that's what I would advise. But yes, I do find a lot of motivational speakers online for sure, and I listen to them, and I will take their content. And I actually use one of Jim Rohn's quotes. He's a motivational speaker in the book. When trying to inspire Gen Z, to kind of give you an example of what that looks like. So Maricel says, do you teach Spanish about stories? No grammar, no book. We have senderos, and the final exam will be from the book. That's a good example. So this question is not necessarily about motivation. This is about content and teaching. So good question. For me at my school, we have a ton of autonomy at our school, and I can basically teach the way that I want to. We don't have this big bureaucracy that tells us what and how we have to teach with all these big exams and all that kind of stuff. So it's very nice that I have the autonomy and the freedom to be able to do what I want to do there. Now, I do teach all the grammar concepts. I teach the verb tenses, and I point out grammar mistakes. We do a ton of writing activities. And so if anybody would actually be interested in how I teach writing, I was thinking about doing a drip course where you get an email every day from me that gives you one tip that you can apply in your classroom for 30 days straight to drastically improve the writing capabilities of your students. So that's kind of how I do grammar, but it's always in context of some kind of story or some discussion that we're talking about. And it doesn't have to be a story. It could be something, real, something you see in the news, or a video that you watched, or a movie that you're watching in class, things like that, anything. It could be that. So I do my grammar, but it's always in context of what we're talking about. And that really helps the students to really get it and put the language together in a way that makes sense for them, because it's bite-sized. Gen Zers have to have everything in sort of a bite-sized, quick way. And what that does is it helps them to be more motivated and successful, because when they see this big long list of things that they have to do, or some big ginormous project that they have to do, a lot of times they will check out, or they have some huge paper that they have to write, 10-page paper, or even if it's just like a 3-page paper, they'll sometimes, a lot of times, check out. So I keep things very small, and then I kind of expand and expand and expand a little bit, not to the point where they burst, but I and I again talk about this in the book, is I expand the boundaries, and then when it gets to a point where they're like, oh, too much pressure, then I kind of contract a little bit more. And so that's kind of how it works. So I really like teaching that way, because it seems to sort of resonate with them. And Maricel says we have Senderos, and the final exam will be from that book. Absolutely. So with the final exam, Musab, hi. With the final exam being from the book, my recommendation would be to take a few minutes out of class every day to go over the exam, to go over the questions, the types of questions that'll be answered. Because if you look at AP teachers, for example, and this is really no different for anybody, but AP teachers, Spanish teachers, French teachers, Italian teachers, whatever, they have to sort of, and I hate to say this, but they have to sort of teach to the test, right? So if you're just coming into this live, I'm just answering a couple questions that are in the chat, but you can certainly rewatch the live replay about where my source of inspiration comes for Gen Z. So anyway, when it comes to AP testing, 90% of students, probably even higher than that, would not pass the AP test if they were not taught how to take that test, because it's very involved. There's a listening section, a writing section, audio section, speaking section, reading comprehension section. I mean, essays, persuasive. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So if you were not taught specifically how to take this test, and you didn't practice taking that test, then really the question would be, how prepared are you to be able to go in and pass that test? So a native speaker, they might, go in and be totally fine, but a student that is not, they might not necessarily walk out with the highest score that they desire. So you have to practice that. That's how I kind of see it, is that you have to practice the test questions and all that kind of stuff with them all the time, regularly, so they get very comfortable with it, and nothing on the test really comes as a surprise to them. And then also it's just kind of reminding them as well that, this test, whether it's the Senderos textbook test or an AP test, none of these tests dictate your intelligence at all. I always say that, for example, so with this, I actually use the book as an example for this, is that I was talking to a student who got, she's such a fantastic Spanish student. I just teach her over the summer because she goes to a different school and I tutor her, but she is so amazing. And she has so much knowledge of Spanish. It's unreal. It's super high level. Well, anyway, so she took the AP Spanish test, and she got a 2. She got a 2 on the AP Spanish test. And so she came to me, she was really upset, thought that, that she was, didn't know anything, hadn't learned anything, and all kinds of stuff, from her classes and all that kind of stuff. And I said, listen, I said, what the AP test didn't test. And I said, I'll give you an example. I said, so I'm a good writer. I can write. And I said, but I took the AP English test in high school, and guess what I got on it? A 2. Well, here I am, a published author now, and I got a 2 on the AP English test. So these tests do not dictate what you're capable of, what you're going to do in the future, anything like that. They're just a metric or a benchmark of what you need to work on, right? So if you've been focusing on grammar this whole time in your classes, then maybe it's time to switch gears a little bit and expand the boundaries, right? So that where you're listening to more audios, or you're doing more multiple choice type questions, or you're writing letters and persuasive essays, and maybe we just need to look at things a little bit differently and expand that boundary a little bit more, because you've been really focused here, and so we need to expand it and broaden the horizons out here. That's all that means. And so they're like, oh, that totally makes sense, right? So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk to you. Hopefully, Maricel, hopefully that was helpful. That's kind of how I do it. And so if you have any questions about anything, let me know. And I'm really excited about getting to know you guys and posting some more content for you on Gen Z and different generations in the education system. So please have a great day. And I'm gonna go walk my dog. So I'll see you guys later. Have a great day. Bye.